The first bullet never even reached the metal. It sliced through empty air inches from Bumpy Johnson's head before the second and third rounds hammered into the side of the Cadillac like fists made of steel. The sound wasn't a sound. It was a rupture, a tearing open of the quiet Harlem evening. People diving for cover, windows shaking, children screaming, and Bumpy, seated in the back of that polished black 1949 Cadillac Series 62, turned his head toward the gunfire with the same expression he used when reading a newspaper. Not fear, not surprise, just irritation, mild and cold, the kind that meant somebody had made a mistake so severe it would change the next 10 years of their life if they survived the night. What nobody saw, not the shooter crouched behind the lamppost, not the two getaway men shivering inside the idling Ford at the corner, was the figure in the front passenger seat. Illinois Gordon had been still as a statue until the first muzzle flash painted the street. Then he moved. Not fast, not desperately, deliberately. The door opened before the shooter even registered that Bumpy wasn't alone. And by the time the shooter took his fourth shot, Illinois was already standing in the street with his gun drawn, staring directly into the darkness the bullets had come from. No panic, no hesitation, just recognition. He knew that signature immediately. He knew the rhythm of those shots, the spacing, the angle. That wasn't some Harlem nobody looking for a reputation. That wasn't a kid trying to impress other kids. That was a professional, a trained one. And even before Illinois saw the silhouette emerging from behind the lamppost, he knew exactly which family had sent him. The Genovese family liked precision. They didn't send amateurs to kill someone like Bumpy. They didn't spray bullets like animals. They used craftsmen, quiet, efficient, invisible until the moment their guns spoke. Which meant this wasn't a message. This wasn't a warning. This was an execution attempt carried out in the most carefully chosen location possible. Not in an alley, not in a club, but on a public Harlem street where they believed Bumpy would be too exposed to respond and too surprised to counter. They thought wrong. Illinois fired once, not at the shooter, but at the ground beside him. The ricochet sparked against the curb and snapped the shooter's head around in shock. That second of shock saved Bumpy's life. Illinois dragged the car door open, grabbed his boss by the arm, and shoved him under the backseat floorboard compartment, a feature Bumpy had added years earlier after an earlier attempt on his life, taught him that preparation was the difference between survival and headlines. Meanwhile, the shooter realized two things too late. First, his job wasn't done. Second, he was no longer the hunter. Illinois started walking toward him, not chasing, not running, walking purposefully. The street was silent, except for the engine of the shooter's car idling in the distance, its nervous driver gripping the steering wheel so tightly the leather creaked. People were hiding behind stoops, peeking through curtains, holding their breath. They all knew who Illinois Gordon was. They all knew what it meant when he walked like that. It meant Harlem was about to change in the next few seconds. The shooter panicked and fired again. 2 rounds. Both missed. Illinois hadn't even stepped aside. He had simply predicted the angle before the man pulled the trigger. He kept walking. The shooter backed up, tripped over the curb, scrambled upright, and sprinted toward the Ford. Illinois stopped, raised his gun, and sighted the back of the man's jacket. But he didn't shoot him. Not yet. Not here. Because killing him on this street would send the wrong message. It would say Bumpy was reacting out of anger. And Bumpy never reacted out of anger. He reacted out of strategy. Illinois lowered the gun and watched the shooter dive into the waiting car. The Ford peeled off the curb so fast the tires squealed, leaving smoke and the smell of burning rubber in the air. Bumpy crawled out from the floor compartment, dusted off his pants, and straightened his fedora. "They sent a professional," he said. Illinois nodded. "Genovese." Bumpy didn't respond for several seconds. He looked at the bullet holes in the Cadillac side panel. 3 clean impacts, all placed within 6 inches of each other. A marksman's grouping. Not sloppy, not rushed. That shooter had been confident he would kill his target, confident he would be paid by morning. Then Bumpy exhaled once, a long, slow release, the kind that made Illinois glance sideways because he knew what it meant. It meant the Genovese family had miscalculated. And when the Genovese miscalculated, they corrected with overkill. When Bumpy miscalculated, he corrected with precision. "We can't hit the shooter," Illinois said quietly. "They'll expect that." "I know," Bumpy said. "We're not touching him." Illinois nodded again. He knew where this was going. Bumpy Johnson didn't retaliate by cutting down the man who pulled the trigger. He retaliated by cutting down the man who signed the check. Word traveled through Harlem within minutes. They shot at Bumpy's Cadillac. They tried to take his head off in his own neighborhood. People swore they heard 20 rounds. Others said the car flipped. Children told stories of Bumpy grabbing bullets out of the air. That was how Harlem worked. Truth amplified itself until it became myth. And myth was almost always more useful than truth. By nightfall, the entire neighborhood was buzzing with one question. Why had the Genovese family done something this reckless? Nobody had to guess for long. Earlier that week, Bumpy had shut down a loan sharking operation backed by the same organization that had been bleeding families along 145th Street. They weren't used to being told no, especially not by a man they believed should have bowed years ago. So they engineered a retaliation meant to send a message to the entire underworld. Bumpy Johnson wasn't untouchable. His Cadillac could be shot. His skin could be pierced. His reign could be ended. But instead of fear, what they got was silence. A silence that grew heavier with each hour, because everyone knew what silence meant in Harlem. It meant Bumpy was thinking. And when Bumpy thought, people didn't sleep. Illinois spent the next hours gathering information. He found witnesses who weren't afraid to talk. He studied the angle of the shooting, the trajectory, the exact moment the Ford pulled away. He found the barber who overheard two men bragging about a contract that had already been carried out. When he brought everything back to Bumpy, the crime boss didn't look impressed. He looked tired, very tired. "They think Harlem is still small," Bumpy murmured quietly. Illinois said nothing. Finally, Bumpy stood from his desk, buttoned his jacket, and took his fedora from the shelf. "Get the car," he said. Illinois frowned. "We going after the shooter?" "No," Bumpy said calmly. "We're going after the man who told him to shoot." And with that sentence, Harlem's temperature changed. Word spread block to block that Bumpy wasn't planning revenge. He was planning something far more dangerous. A demonstration. Not a hit, not a war. A demonstration. The kind that didn't just punish an offense. It rewrote the rules of the city. Because if you shoot at Bumpy Johnson's Cadillac, you don't just risk missing. You risk changing who controls New York. Illinois drove the replacement Cadillac, a deep Navy Fleetwood, through Harlem like a submarine cutting through dark water. No music, no talking, no engine noise louder than a low hum. Bumpy sat in the back, hands folded, hat low over his brow, looking out the window the way a chess grandmaster studies a board before sacrificing a queen. Every street he passed was a square on that board. Every face he saw was a piece placed exactly where it belonged. Harlem wasn't just his home. It was his map, his machine, his fortress. And someone had just fired a bullet at the king's carriage. The shooter wasn't important anymore. Men like that came and went. Tools with names nobody remembered. But the man who authorized it, that was the shape Bumpy studied through the reflection in the window. That was the man he needed to touch. Not kill. Not torture. Touch. Because in Harlem, a touch from Bumpy Johnson traveled further than a bullet. As they drove, Illinois reported what he had gathered. The car used in the shooting had been a Ford sedan, traced back to a junk lot purchased under a false name. The accent of the buyer had given him away. Italian. Connected. "They're not hiding it," Illinois said. "No?" Bumpy replied calmly. "They want me to know." Illinois turned onto 125th Street. The sidewalks were still buzzing from the shooting. People leaned together, whispering. Mothers pulled children closer. Shopkeepers who normally greeted Bumpy with nods now stared silently, trying to read his expression, his posture, the tilt of his hat, anything that might reveal how Harlem should feel. Nervous, angry, ready for war. Bumpy gave them nothing. "They think shooting the Cadillac makes me bleed," he murmured. "They don't understand. Cars can be replaced. Reputation can't." Illinois nodded slowly. "The shooter's name is Gio Russo," he said. "Never heard of him. You wouldn't. He's a private contractor. They pull him out for clean kills." That meant the order hadn't come from a low-level soldier. Someone higher had approved it. A man named Nicky Valente. The name landed heavily inside the car. Nicky the Silk Tie. Valente was a mid-level administrator with ambitions larger than his authority. Smooth talking, intelligent, but reckless enough to believe Harlem had grown weak. "He thinks he can test me," Bumpy said quietly. Illinois kept driving. They crossed the invisible boundary where Harlem ended and Manhattan's power structure began. At a cigar lounge known for hosting certain meetings, Bumpy and Illinois stepped inside. The room fell silent the moment they entered. 5 men sat at a table, associates connected to Valente. Suits expensive, shoes polished, confidence built on distance from Harlem. They didn't look up when the door opened. They looked up when the room went quiet. Bumpy walked to their table. "I hear Nicky Valente sent Russo to kill me," he said softly. No accusations, no shouting, just a statement. The men exchanged looks. Nobody spoke. Illinois shifted his weight behind Bumpy. Quiet, but dangerous. One of the men finally glanced toward the back room. That was enough. Illinois opened the door. Inside sat a man with a cigar, pretending not to listen. The conversation that followed lasted barely a minute. When Bumpy walked out again, he had what he needed. Later that night, he and Illinois arrived at a quiet apartment building where Nicky Valente believed he was safe. The doorman recognized Illinois immediately and stepped aside without a word. They rode the elevator to the 8th floor. The hallway was silent. Bumpy knocked gently on the apartment door. Valente opened it halfway, still half asleep. Then he saw who stood outside. The door opened fully. "This is a misunderstanding," Valente stammered. "No," Bumpy replied calmly. "It's a message." Inside the apartment, Valente tried to negotiate, tried to explain, tried to claim it wasn't personal. Bumpy listened, quietly. Then he placed a single bullet on Valente's knee, the same caliber that had struck his Cadillac. "This," Bumpy said softly, "is permission." Valente's confidence evaporated. Bumpy leaned closer. "You're going to call off every plan involving Harlem. You're going to tell everyone above you that touching Bumpy Johnson again is a mistake." Valente nodded frantically. "And if I don't?" he whispered. Illinois spoke from behind him, his voice low and steady. "Then tonight ends differently." Valente broke. "I'll call it off," he said. "Everything." Bumpy straightened his coat. "Good," he said calmly. "I'm not sparing you. I'm using you. Fear travels faster than bullets." Bumpy and Illinois left the apartment as quietly as they had entered. As the elevator descended, Illinois finally asked, "What about Russo?" Bumpy adjusted his hat. "Russo's already been handled," he said. "Handled how?" "He woke up in an alley tonight without his trigger finger. Someone left it in his coat pocket." Illinois nodded slowly. That was Harlem precision. Quiet. Symbolic. Final. By morning, word had spread across Manhattan, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Harlem. Valente had been visited. Russo had been retired. And the message was clear. Bumpy Johnson didn't need to pull the trigger. He only needed to show up.